Sign these satisfactions. Sign them now so we can finally get rid of you. Those were the words Emma heard on Christmas Eve. 6 months pregnant, standing in her own living room, watching her husband slide divorce papers across the table while his pregnant mistress sat on the couch smiling. But here is what nobody in that room knew. The woman they were throwing out into the snow like garbage was not Emma Sullivan.
These finalized documents
the struggling
unequivocally
graphic
prove our
designer
case.
who clipped
Custody
coupons
must be
and
granted
rode
to
the
my
subway.
client, effective immediately.
She was Emma Blackwell, sole heir to a $4.2
digital
billion
recorder
fortune.
contains Gregory's
And her
full
dying
confession
father
regarding
had left her
the
something
embezzlement.
hidden. Something that would expose every single lie, every betrayal, every secret they thought would stay buried forever. What happens when the woman you destroyed turns out to be the one person who can destroy you instead? What happens when the mother-in-law who called you a gold digger discovers you own the house she is standing in? What happens when the mistress who stole your husband learns that her baby belongs to someone else entirely? Someone sitting in that very room? This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about a woman who lost everything on Christmas Eve and spent the next year becoming someone her enemies never saw coming. She did not call her rich family to save her. She did not beg her husband to take her back. She saved herself. And by the time she was finished, every single person who hurt her was begging for mercy they would never receive. Stay with me until the end, because the final satisfaction twist, you will never see it coming. Value statement. My stepmother said I would never reach 1,000 subscribers. Please help me prove her wrong. Subscribe to this channel and let us keep these powerful stories alive together. Before we begin, let me tell you why this story matters. This is not just entertainment. This is a survival guide disguised as drama. Every woman who has ever been underestimated, betrayed, or thrown away will find herself in Emma's journey. And every lesson she learns about strength, about self-worth, about refusing to beg for love from people who see you as a transaction, these are lessons that could change your life. If you have ever stayed too long with someone who did not deserve you, if you have ever made yourself small so someone else could feel big, if you have ever wondered whether you were enough, this story is for you. Now let us begin. The snow fell thick and heavy over Manhattan on Christmas Eve, blanketing the city in a layer of pristine white that made everything look like a postcard. Inside the Mitchell family brownstone on the Upper East Side, Emma Sullivan Mitchell stood on her tiptoes, stretching her 5'4" frame to hang a crystal angel ornament on the highest branch she could reach. Her 6-month pregnant belly made the task awkward and slightly dangerous. She wobbled on her feet, one hand gripping the ladder, the other carefully positioning the delicate ornament that had belonged to her mother. This angel had hung on every Christmas tree of Emma's childhood, a small piece of her past that she carried into her present. Emma stepped back to admire her work. The 12-foot Douglas fir sparkled with hundreds of tiny white lights, silver tinsel, and ornaments she had collected over the 3 years of her marriage. Each one held a memory: the small Eiffel Tower from their honeymoon in Paris, the ceramic heart Ryan had given her on their first anniversary, the tiny baby booty she had bought the day she found out she was pregnant. She placed her hand on her swollen belly and smiled. In 3 months, she would be holding her daughter. She and Ryan had decided on the name together: Grace Elizabeth Mitchell, a name that spoke of elegance and strength, qualities Emma hoped her daughter would possess. The brownstone smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Emma had spent the entire day preparing for tonight's dinner. She had woken at 5 in the morning to start the bird, had peeled potatoes until her fingers ached, had baked her grandmother's apple pie from scratch, using the recipe card that was now yellow with age. Everything had to be perfect. This was their 3rd Christmas as a married couple, and Emma wanted to prove to Patricia, her mother-in-law, that she belonged in this family. Not that Patricia had ever made her feel welcome. From the moment Ryan had introduced Emma to his mother 3 years ago, Patricia Mitchell had made her disapproval crystal clear. She never said anything directly offensive, of course. Patricia was far too refined for that. Instead, she communicated through raised eyebrows, through backhanded compliments, through the way she looked at Emma's thrift store dresses and secondhand furniture as if they carried some contagious disease. Emma had tried everything to win Patricia over. She had taken cooking classes to prepare the elaborate meals Patricia favored. She had read books on wine so she could discuss vintages at dinner parties. She had even started volunteering at the children's hospital where Patricia sat on the board, hoping that shared charitable work might build a bridge between them. Nothing worked. Patricia remained cold, distant, and perpetually disappointed. But tonight would be different. Emma had prepared Patricia's favorite dishes. She had set the table with the good china, the set that Patricia had given them as a wedding gift, and then criticized Emma for not using often enough. She had even bought a new maternity dress, a deep green velvet that matched her eyes and cost more than Emma usually spent on an entire month of clothing. Tonight, Emma was determined to finally earn her mother-in-law's approval. She heard the front door open and turned toward the foyer with a welcoming smile already forming on her lips. Ryan had said he would be home by 6, and it was now 6:15. She had started to worry, but now relief flooded through her. But Ryan was not alone. Patricia Mitchell swept into the living room first, moving with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent her entire life being watched and admired. She wore a floor-length burgundy gown that probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary at the hospital. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, catching the light from the Christmas tree and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Behind Patricia came Gregory Mitchell, Ryan's father. Gregory was a small man who seemed to grow smaller every year, shrinking into himself as if trying to disappear entirely. He wore an expensive suit that hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes darted around the room without landing on anything specific. He had lost his consulting job 3 months ago, and the failure seemed to have hollowed him out from the inside. Then came Ryan. Emma's husband of 3 years walked into their living room with an expression she had never seen before. His jaw was set hard, his blue eyes cold and distant, his shoulders rigid with tension. He did not look at her, he did not smile, he did not wish her Merry Christmas. And behind Ryan walked Jessica Blake. Emma felt her smile freeze on her face. Jessica was Ryan's office manager at his architecture firm, a 29-year-old woman with sharp cheekbones, honey blonde hair, and the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive salons and careful attention. Emma had met her twice at company events. Both times she had noticed the way Jessica watched Ryan when she thought no one was looking. Both times she had noticed Ryan's hand lingering on Jessica's lower back just a moment too long. Both times Emma had told herself she was imagining things. She had told herself that jealousy was unbecoming and that she needed to trust her husband. She had told herself that Ryan loved her, that he had chosen her, that the vows they had exchanged meant something. But she was not imagining the designer dress Jessica wore tonight, a form-fitting black number that must have cost thousands of dollars. She was not imagining the way Jessica's hand rested possessively on Ryan's arm as they walked through the door together. And she was definitely not imagining Jessica's visibly pregnant belly straining against the silk fabric of her dress. The crystal angel ornament slipped from Emma's suddenly nerveless fingers. It fell in what seemed like slow motion, tumbling through the air and shattered against the hardwood floor in an explosion of sparkling fragments. Nobody moved to help her clean it up. Nobody even acknowledged the sound. Patricia settled onto the leather sofa and crossed her ankles with the practiced elegance of a woman who had spent decades perfecting every gesture. She smoothed her burgundy gown over her knees and looked at Emma with an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. Gregory retreated to the corner armchair, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He had not looked at Emma once since entering the room. Ryan guided Jessica to sit beside his mother on the sofa, then turned to face his wife. His expression held no love, no warmth, no trace of the man who had proposed to her under the stars in Central Park 2 years ago. The man who had cried when she told him she was pregnant. The man who had promised her forever. That man was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes held nothing but cold calculation and contempt. Ryan spoke first. His voice was flat and businesslike, as if he were addressing a colleague at work rather than the woman carrying his child. He said he wanted to make this quick. He said there was no point in dragging things out. He said they were all adults here, and they could handle this like civilized people. Ryan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He walked to the dining table, the one Emma had spent an hour setting with Patricia's good china, and slid the envelope across the polished surface toward her. Emma stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her palms had gone slick with sweat. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she registered that her phone was buzzing in her cardigan pocket. but she could not look away from that envelope. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The paper felt heavy, weighted with meaning she did not yet understand but already dreaded. She lifted the flap with fingers that did not seem to belong to her. She pulled out the stack of papers inside. The words at the top of the first page swam before her eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. Her husband had brought her divorce papers on Christmas Eve. Emma's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep herself from falling. The documents in her hand rustled with her trembling. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She looked at Ryan, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of doubt, any trace of the love she had believed in so completely. She found nothing. Patricia spoke next. Her voice was honey-sweet and absolutely poisonous, dripping with a satisfaction that she did not bother to hide. Patricia said that finally they could stop pretending. She said that finally they could drop this ridiculous charade of accepting charity cases into their family. Patricia smiled, showing perfect white teeth that looked predatory in the Christmas tree lights. Emma asked what Patricia meant by charity cases. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, thin and reedy, and nothing like herself. Patricia laughed. It was not a kind sound. It was the laugh of a cat playing with the mouse it had already caught. Patricia called Emma a gold digger. Patricia said that Emma had been bleeding Ryan dry since the day they met. Patricia said that everyone could see it except Ryan himself, who had been too blinded by whatever cheap tricks Emma had used to seduce him. But now, Patricia said, his eyes were finally open. The words hit Emma like physical blows. She had spent 3 years trying to prove herself to this woman. 3 years of perfect dinners and volunteer work and biting her tongue when Patricia made snide comments about her background. And this was what Patricia really thought of her. This was what she had always thought. Emma turned to Ryan. She searched his face one more time for the man she had married. The man who had said she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The man who had held her through her father's funeral and promised that she would never have to face anything alone again. She asked Ryan to tell her this was not happening. She asked him to tell her this was some kind of terrible joke. Ryan's expression did not change. He said he was sorry, but his voice carried no apology. He said things had changed. He said he had realized he made a mistake marrying Emma. He said she did not understand his world, his ambitions, his needs. He said she was holding him back from becoming the man he was meant to be. Ryan gestured toward Jessica, who sat on the sofa with one hand resting on her pregnant belly. He said that Jessica understood him. Jessica supported him. Jessica was the partner he needed, not someone who counted every penny and shopped at thrift stores and made him feel guilty for wanting nice things. Emma pressed her hand against her own pregnant belly. She could feel her daughter moving inside her, a gentle flutter that she usually found comforting. Now it felt like a reminder of everything she was about to lose. She asked Ryan about their baby. She asked if he even cared about their daughter. Jessica spoke for the first time. Her voice was sugary sweet and absolutely poisonous, a perfect match for Patricia's tone. Jessica said that she was pregnant too, in case Emma had not noticed. Jessica patted her belly with a proprietary smile. Jessica said that her baby would carry the Mitchell name. Jessica said that her baby would inherit everything that mattered. Jessica looked directly at Emma with cold triumph in her eyes. Jessica said that Emma's baby would carry nothing. The room spun around Emma. The Christmas tree lights blurred into streams of color. The smell of roasting turkey, which had seemed so welcoming an hour ago, now made her stomach churn with nausea. Patricia stood and walked toward Emma, her expensive perfume preceding her like a toxic cloud. She stopped just inches away, close enough that Emma could see the cruel satisfaction in every line of her face. Patricia told Emma to sign the papers. Patricia said Emma should make this easy on everyone, including herself. Patricia said Emma should take whatever Ryan was offering and disappear back to whatever hole she had crawled out of. Patricia leaned even closer, her voice dropping to a hiss that only Emma could hear. Patricia said that Emma should have known this was coming. Patricia said that women like Emma always ended up alone. Patricia said that Emma was nothing special, nothing memorable, nothing worth keeping. Patricia said that Emma had been a placeholder, a practice wife, a temporary amusement until someone better came along. Patricia stepped back and smiled pleasantly, as if she had just been discussing the weather. Emma looked down at the divorce papers. She looked at the pen lying beside them on the table. She looked at the four faces watching her with varying degrees of hostility, contempt, and indifference. She thought about fighting. She thought about screaming, about throwing the papers in Ryan's face, about demanding explanations and apologies and justice. She thought about calling a lawyer, calling the police, calling anyone who might help her. But what good would that do? These people had already made their decision. They had probably made it months ago, had been planning this ambush while Emma cooked their meals and cleaned their house, and carried what she had believed was a wanted child. This was just the execution of a sentence that had been passed long before tonight. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Harold Blackwell had spoken those words to her just weeks before he died, sitting in the garden of his Connecticut estate while autumn leaves fell around them. Harold had said that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. He had said that the people who matter will still be there after the flames die down. He had said that rock bottom is not a destination, it is a foundation. Emma had not understood what he meant at the time. She had thought he was being philosophical, offering the kind of vague wisdom that old men often shared with their children. Now she understood perfectly. Emma picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she brought it to the first signature line. She could hear Patricia's sharp intake of breath, could feel Ryan's eyes boring into the top of her head, could sense Jessica's triumphant smile even without looking up. She signed each page methodically. The scratching sound of ink on paper was the only noise in the silent room. When she reached the final page, she paused for just a moment. Then she signed that too. Emma set down the pen and stood slowly, her hands supporting her lower back. Her spine was straight, her chin was high. If they expected her to crumble, to beg, to grovel for mercy, they were going to be disappointed. Patricia's smile widened into something approaching genuine happiness. She told Emma that she was glad Emma could be reasonable for once. She told Emma to leave her keys on the table and get out. Patricia checked her diamond-encrusted watch. She said they had dinner reservations at 8 and Emma was making them late. Emma reached into her cardigan pocket and placed her house keys beside the signed divorce papers. She walked to the closet and retrieved her coat, her purse, and the small suitcase she kept packed for hospital visits since her pregnancy had progressed. She did not look back as she opened the front door. She did not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The December wind hit her like a physical blow. Snow was falling thick and fast now, already accumulating on the sidewalk and the steps and the wrought iron railing. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Her thin coat, chosen for style rather than warmth, offered little protection against the cold. She had no car. Ryan had sold her Toyota 2 months ago, claiming they needed to consolidate expenses while his architecture firm struggled. She had agreed because she trusted him, because she believed marriage meant sacrifice, because she thought they were building something together. She had no money. Their bank accounts were joint, and she had a sinking feeling that Ryan had already emptied them. The Mitchells had been planning this for a while. They would have prepared. She had no phone charge. Her battery had been dying all day, and she had been so focused on preparing for tonight's dinner that she had forgotten to plug it in. She had maybe 5% left, enough for 1 or 2 calls if she was lucky. Emma stood on the brownstone steps, a single suitcase in her hand and a baby in her belly, watching the snow fall on Christmas Eve in Manhattan. She was 32 years old, 6 months pregnant, and completely alone. What nobody in that room knew, what Emma herself had kept hidden for 3 years, was that she was not Emma Sullivan, the freelance graphic designer who clipped coupons and rode the subway to work. She was not the poor girl from nowhere who had stumbled into Ryan Mitchell's life by accident. She was Emma Blackwell, only daughter of Harold Blackwell, sole heir to Blackwell Industries and a fortune worth $4.2 billion. But that money could not help her now. Her father had died 8 months ago, and his estate was still tangled in legal proceedings. Emma had not claimed her inheritance, had not even visited her father's lawyer since the funeral. She had been too consumed with grief, too invested in her new identity, too determined to prove that she could make it on her own. The inheritance meant nothing if she had no way to access it. The billions in her father's accounts might as well be on the moon for all the good they did her tonight. Emma started walking. She did not know where she was going. She only knew that she could not stand still, could not freeze to death on the steps of the brownstone where her marriage had just died. The snow kept falling. The city stretched out before her, vast and cold and indifferent to her suffering. Merry Christmas, Emma thought bitterly. Merry Christmas indeed. Emma walked for 2 hours through the empty streets of Manhattan. The snow soaked through her thin coat and numbed her fingers. Her flats, chosen to match her green velvet dress, were not designed for winter weather. They offered no traction, no insulation, no protection against the elements. By the time she had walked 10 blocks, her feet had gone from cold to painful to completely numb. Every few blocks, she stopped to catch her breath and press her hand against her belly. Her daughter was still moving, still kicking, still alive despite everything. That small flutter of life was the only thing keeping Emma from collapsing entirely. She tried calling Maggie 7 times. Margaret Reynolds, her best friend since freshman year at Columbia, was the only person Emma could think of who might help her. But each call went straight to voicemail. Maggie was on vacation in Florida, spending Christmas with her parents in their retirement community near Tampa. She would not see Emma's messages until morning at the earliest, and by then, Emma might have frozen to death on these unforgiving streets. The temperature continued to drop as the night deepened. Emma could no longer feel her hands or feet. Her cheeks stung from the cold wind. Her pregnant belly felt heavy and awkward, throwing off her balance on the slippery sidewalks. Twice she nearly fell. The second time, she grabbed a street lamp to steady herself and stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, fighting back tears. She could not do this. She could not survive this. She was going to die out here alone and abandoned, and her baby would die with her. No, she shook her head violently, spraying snowflakes from her hair. She was not going to die. She was not going to let them win. If Patricia Mitchell thought she could throw Emma out onto the street and forget about her, Patricia was going to be very disappointed. Emma started walking again, one foot in front of the other, heading vaguely south. She did not have a destination in mind. She just needed to keep moving, to keep her blood circulating, to keep herself alive until she could figure out what to do next. Around 11 p.m., she found herself standing outside a narrow building on the Lower East Side. A hand-painted sign above the door read Hope House in cheerful yellow letters. Below that, in smaller text, it said, Women's Shelter and Emergency Services. The irony of the name was not lost on Emma. Hope. She had precious little of that left. She stood outside for several minutes, unable to make herself go in. Homeless shelters were for other people, desperate people, people who had made bad choices or fallen on hard times or suffered from circumstances beyond their control. Emma had always donated to places like this, had always felt sympathy for the women who needed them, but she had never imagined she would be one of them. But what choice did she have? She could not stay outside. She could not walk anymore. She had nowhere else to go. Emma pushed open the door and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the darkness of the streets, making her squint and shield her eyes. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and instant coffee and something indefinable that spoke of desperation and survival. Metal folding chairs lined the walls. Posters offered information about domestic violence, hotlines, job training programs, addiction services. A tired-looking woman sat behind a battered desk near the entrance. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and deep lines around her eyes that suggested she had seen more than her share of suffering. She looked up when Emma entered, her expression shifting from weary to concerned in an instant. The woman asked if Emma needed help. Her voice was surprisingly gentle, at odds with her stern appearance. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She tried again. She managed to say that she needed somewhere to stay tonight. Just tonight. She said she had nowhere else to go. The woman nodded as if she had heard the story 1,000 times before. She probably had. She handed Emma a clipboard with a stack of forms and gestured toward the chairs. Emma sat down heavily and stared at the forms. Name, date of birth, emergency contact, reason for seeking services. The questions seemed impossibly intrusive, asking her to reduce her entire catastrophe to check boxes and blank lines. She filled out the forms with shaking hands. Homeless, she wrote in the box for current housing status. Pregnant, she wrote in the box for medical conditions. None, she wrote in the box for available financial resources. The woman reviewed the forms and asked a few additional questions. How far along was Emma? Did she have any family in the city? Had she experienced any domestic violence? Emma answered mechanically. 6 months. No family, no violence, just betrayal. The woman nodded again and handed Emma a thin blanket and a numbered card. She explained that Emma could have cot number 17 for the night. She explained that breakfast would be served at 7 and that Emma would need to leave by 9 unless she wanted to apply for extended stay services. Emma took the blanket and the card and followed the woman's pointing finger toward a large room filled with metal cots. Some were occupied by sleeping forms, others by women who stared at the ceiling or whispered to each other in the darkness. The air was stale and close, carrying the mixed sense of too many people in too small a space. She found cot 17 in the far corner, near a window that looked out onto an alley filled with dumpsters. The mattress was thin, the pillow flat and hard. Emma lay down without removing her tohum, pulling the blanket over herself and curling around her pregnant belly. Around her, other women slept or pretended to sleep. Some cried quietly, others snored. One woman near the door muttered in her sleep, words that sounded like prayers or curses or both. Emma had never felt so alone in her life. She had never felt so small, so insignificant, so utterly worthless. This morning she had been planning the perfect Christmas dinner. Tonight she was sleeping on a cot in a homeless shelter while her husband celebrated with his mistress. How had everything gone so wrong so fast? A voice spoke from the cot beside her, making her jump. The voice asked if this was Emma's first time here. Emma turned her head. The woman speaking was about 45, with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had a warm face, the kind of face that suggested she smiled often, despite whatever circumstances had brought her to this place. Emma said yes, it was her first time. The woman nodded knowingly. She said she had figured as much. She said Emma had that look, the look of someone who had never expected to end up here. The woman introduced herself as Rosa Martinez and said she'd been staying at Hope House for 3 weeks while she figured out her next move. Emma introduced herself in return, grateful for any human connection after the cruelty of the evening. Rosa asked what had happened to Emma. She said Emma did not have to answer if she did not want to, but sometimes it helped to talk. Emma found herself telling the whole story. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. The Christmas ambush, the divorce papers, the mistress with her pregnant belly, the mother-in-law's vicious words, the cold calculation in Ryan's eyes as he ended their marriage and threw away their daughter. Rosa listened without interrupting. When Emma finished, Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then Rosa said that Emma's husband was trash. She said his family was trash. She said the mistress was trash. Rosa said that all of them together were not worth the ground Emma walked on, and that Emma was better off without every single one of them. Emma almost laughed despite her tears. She asked Rosa how she knew that. She asked how Rosa could be so sure. Rosa said she had been married to a man for 15 years who gambled away everything they owned. She said her husband had lost their house, their savings, their children's college fund, everything. And then, when there was nothing left to lose, he had blamed Rosa for not making enough money to cover his losses. Rosa said she had spent 15 years trying to fix him. 15 years of believing that if she just loved him enough, supported him enough, stood by him long enough, he would change. He would become the man she had fallen in love with. Rosa said he never changed. She said some people did not want to be fixed. They just wanted someone to blame for their own failures. Rosa reached across the space between their cots and squeezed Emma's hand. Her grip was warm and strong and surprisingly comforting. Rosa said that Emma was going to be okay. She said it would not feel okay for a while, maybe a long while. She said the nights would be hard and the mornings would be harder. But eventually Rosa promised it would get better. Emma would get stronger. She would find her way. Emma wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that there was a path forward, that this nightmare would not last forever, that she would somehow survive this and come out the other side. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. Every time she started to drift off, she saw Ryan's cold eyes, heard Patricia's cruel laughter, felt the weight of those divorce papers in her hands. She was still awake when the cramping started. The first pain hit around 2 in the morning, a sharp twisting sensation in her lower abdomen that made her gasp. She pressed her hands against her belly and felt her daughter moving. restless and agitated. The second pain was worse. Emma doubled over on the cot, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Something was wrong. It's very wrong. Rosa was awake instantly, shaking Emma's shoulder, asking what was happening. Emma could barely speak through the pain. She managed to gasp that something was wrong with the baby, that she needed help. Rosa ran for the shelter staff. Within minutes, someone had called 911. The other women in the room were awake now, watching with worried eyes as Emma writhed on the cot, tears streaming down her face. Please, Emma prayed to whatever God might be listening. Please not my baby. Please not like this. I have already lost everything else tonight. Please do not take her too. The ambulance arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, asking questions Emma could barely process. How far along was she? When had the pain started? Did she have any medical conditions? The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and bright lights and people talking in urgent voices. Emma lay strapped to the stretcher, clutching her belly, praying harder than she had ever prayed in her life. At the hospital, they rushed her into an examination room. A doctor appeared, a young woman with serious eyes and gentle hands. She pressed instruments against Emma's belly, studied monitors, asked more questions. The minutes stretched into hours. Emma lay there alone, counting ceiling tiles, listening to the beeping of machines, waiting to find out if her daughter would live or die. Finally, the doctor spoke. She said that the baby was fine. Emma burst into tears of relief, but the doctor was not finished. She said that Emma's stress levels were dangerously high. She said that Emma's blood pressure was elevated and her cortisol levels were through the roof. She said that whatever was happening in Emma's life, she needed to find some stability, some peace, some way to calm down. The doctor looked at Emma with serious eyes. She said that if Emma did not find a way to reduce her stress, the next scare might not end so well. The baby was fine now, but continuing like this put both of them at risk. Emma nodded mechanically. She promised to try. She did not know how she was supposed to reduce stress when her entire life had just collapsed, but she would try. The doctor left, and Emma was alone again. She lay in that hospital bed on Christmas morning, staring out the window at the snow still falling over the city. Somewhere out there, families were opening presents and eating breakfast together. Children were squealing with delight over new toys. Couples were kissing under mistletoe and whispering Merry Christmas to each other. Emma had nothing. She had no husband, no home, no money, no family. She had almost lost her baby. She was lying alone in a hospital room on Christmas Day with nothing to her name except a thin coat and a small suitcase. This was her lowest point. This was rock bottom. She thought about giving up. She thought about calling Ryan and begging him to take her back, promising to be whatever he wanted her to be. She thought about calling Patricia and apologizing for whatever imaginary offense she had committed. She thought about doing whatever it took to make this nightmare stop. But then she felt her daughter move inside her. A gentle flutter, like butterfly wings, reminding Emma that she was not alone, that there was still someone who depended on her, who needed her, who would love her unconditionally. Her father's voice echoed in her memory again. Harold Blackwell had said that rock bottom was not a place where people stayed. He had said it was a place where people finally found solid ground to stand on. He had said that sometimes you had to fall all the way down before you could start climbing back up. Emma looked at the ultrasound image the doctor had printed for her daughter's tiny form, curled and safe inside her. This baby had not given up. This baby was still fighting. Emma was going to fight too. She thought about her life, about all the choices that had led her here. She had spent 32 years trying to be loved by people who would never love her back. Her stepmother, who had resented her from the moment Harold remarried. Her college ex, who had only wanted her for her trust fund. And now Ryan, who had apparently targeted her from the very beginning. Emma kept choosing people who needed to feel superior in order to love her. She kept making herself small so others could feel big. She kept giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left, and then being surprised when they threw her away. That pattern ended now. Emma made a vow lying in that hospital bed with her daughter's heartbeat visible on the monitor. She vowed that she would never beg anyone to love her again. She vowed that she would never shrink herself to fit someone else's expectations. She vowed that she would never again let fear of abandonment make her tolerate disrespect. And she vowed that she would teach her daughter the same lessons. Her little girl would grow up knowing her worth. Her little girl would never settle for crumbs when she deserved the whole feast. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She had found a charging outlet in the ambulance and plugged it in out of habit. The screen showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, all from Maggie Reynolds. Emma answered the next incoming call. Maggie's voice exploded through the speaker like a force of nature. She demanded to know what had happened. She said she had just landed at JFK after taking the first flight out of Tampa. She said she had gotten Emma's messages. She said she would be at the hospital in 30 minutes. Maggie used several curse words strung together in combinations that Emma had never heard before. She threatened to do various anatomically improbable things to Ryan and his entire family. She declared that she would personally destroy every Mitchell who had ever drawn breath. For the first time since Christmas Eve, Emma felt something other than despair. She felt hope, real hope, the kind that comes from knowing you are not alone. Maggie Reynolds arrived at the hospital like a hurricane making landfall. She burst through the door of Emma's room, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor, her Louis Vuitton travel bag swinging from her shoulder. She had clearly come straight from the airport without stopping to change or rest. Maggie was 34 years old, a senior associate at one of Manhattan's most prestigious divorce law firms, and Emma's best friend since their freshman year at Columbia. She had flown red-eye from Tampa, abandoning her parents' Christmas celebration the moment she understood what had happened. She was still wearing vacation clothes, a floral sundress under a heavy winter coat, her feet somehow crammed into heels despite the snow outside. Her expression was murderous. Maggie crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped Emma in a fierce hug that somehow managed to be gentle around her pregnant belly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just held each other while Emma's tears soaked into Maggie's coat and Maggie's rage simmered just beneath the surface. Finally, Maggie pulled back and looked Emma directly in the eyes. She said she wanted every single detail. She wanted names. She wanted dates. She wanted to know exactly what those people had said to Emma before throwing her out like garbage on Christmas Eve. Emma told her everything. By the time she finished, Maggie had stopped pacing. She stood by the window with her arms crossed and her jaw set in what Emma recognized as her courtroom face. It was the expression Maggie wore when she was about to destroy someone legally, financially, and emotionally. Maggie said that Emma had married into a family of actual demons. Maggie said she had met Patricia Mitchell once at a charity gala 3 years ago. Maggie said that Patricia had complained that the champagne was not cold enough. Maggie said it was a children's hospital fundraiser, a fundraiser to help sick children, and Patricia had complained about champagne temperature. Maggie said that told you everything you needed to know about that woman. Despite everything, Emma almost laughed. It felt strange to almost laugh after the worst night of her life. Maggie sat down on the edge of the hospital bed. Her expression softened from murderous rage to deep concern. She asked Emma how she was really doing, not the polished answer she would give to doctors and strangers. The real answer. Emma admitted that she was terrified. She said she had nothing, no money, no home, no plan. She said she had almost lost the baby last night. She said she did not know how she was going to survive the next week, let alone the next 18 years of raising a child alone. Emma said she felt like a failure. She felt stupid for not seeing the signs. She felt worthless for being discarded so easily. She felt like everything Patricia had said about her was true. Maggie took Emma's hand firmly. Her grip was strong and certain. Maggie said that Emma needed to listen very carefully. She said that Emma was not a failure. Emma had been targeted by predators who were very good at what they did. Emma had been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed by people who had been planning this for years. Maggie said that Emma was not stupid. Emma was trusting. There was a difference. Trusting someone who claimed to love you was not stupid. It was human. The Mitchells were the ones who should be ashamed, not Emma. Maggie said that Emma was not worthless. Emma was one of the kindest, most generous, most genuinely good people Maggie had ever known. The fact that monsters had taken advantage of that goodness said everything about them and nothing about Emma. Maggie squeezed Emma's hand even harder. She said that Emma was not alone. She had never been alone, even when she felt like it. Some people showed up when times were good, when there were parties to attend and champagne to drink. Other people showed up when times were bad, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. Maggie said she was the second kind. Emma's tears started flowing again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of the overwhelming emotion that comes from realizing someone truly loves you. Maggie handed Emma a tissue and waited for the crying to subside. Then she got down to business. Maggie said that Emma was going to move into her apartment. The guest room was comfortable and private, and Emma could stay as long as she needed. Maggie said that Emma was going to rest and recover and take care of that baby. In the meantime, Maggie said she was going to tear Ryan Mitchell and his entire family into tiny legal pieces. Emma asked what that meant exactly. Maggie explained that she had reviewed the divorce papers during her layover in Atlanta. Ryan's lawyer had made several critical errors. The documents were sloppy, rushed, clearly prepared in haste. More importantly, Emma had signed them under duress. She was pregnant. She was ambushed without warning. She was denied the opportunity to consult with legal counsel. Maggie said the agreement was voidable. She said they could challenge the divorce in court. They could argue that Emma had been coerced. They could potentially have the entire thing thrown out and force Ryan to negotiate fair terms. Emma asked if she even wanted to fight for this marriage. It was a question she had been asking herself all night. Ryan had proven himself to be a liar, a cheater, a man who would throw away his pregnant wife for a younger model. Did Emma really want to fight to stay married to someone like that? The answer came to her immediately. No, she did not want Ryan back. She did not want anything from him except her dignity and her daughter's future. She wanted to fight for what was hers, not for what was already broken beyond repair. Maggie nodded in approval. She said that was exactly the right answer. Maggie helped Emma check out of the hospital that afternoon. She had brought warm clothes, comfortable shoes, and a thermos of soup from the deli Emma loved. Small kindnesses that felt enormous after the cruelty of Christmas Eve. Maggie's apartment was a two-bedroom on the Upper West Side, decorated in soft colors and filled with books. Emma had stayed here dozens of times over the years, for movie nights and wine sessions and the kind of heart-to-heart conversations that only best friends can have. But this time felt different. This time, it was not a visit. This was survival. Over the next few days, Maggie dug into the Mitchell family finances with the tenacity of a bloodhound on a scent. She filed requests for financial disclosure. She subpoenaed bank records. She tracked down every asset, every debt, every transaction she could find. What she discovered was shocking. Ryan's architecture firm was not just failing, it was drowning in debt. $800,000 in the red, with creditors circling and investors fleeing. The business had been hemorrhaging money for over a year, and Ryan had hidden the extent of the damage from Emma. The Mitchell family brownstone, which Patricia treated like her personal palace, was mortgaged to the hilt. They had refinanced multiple times, pulling out equity to maintain their lifestyle, until there was barely any value left. Patricia's credit cards were maxed out. Gregory had not worked in months and had no prospects. The consulting job he had lost was apparently his third termination in 2 years. The Mitchell family was broke. They were keeping up appearances through loans and credit and sheer desperation. But here was the strange part. Despite all this debt, large sums of money had been deposited into Patricia's personal account over the past year. Tens of thousands of dollars appearing regularly with no clear source. Maggie said that someone was funneling money to the Mitchells. She said the question was who and why. Where was this money coming from, and what did the Mitchells have to offer in return? Emma returned to work at the hospital 3 days after Christmas. She had not actually quit her job as a social worker, just taken leave for the holidays. Her boss welcomed her back warmly, expressing sympathy for what she described as Emma's family emergency without prying for details. Emma was grateful for the normalcy of work, for the distraction of helping other people with their problems. Every family she counseled, every crisis she helped navigate, reminded her that she was capable and competent and worthy of respect. She started documenting everything. Every interaction with Ryan, recorded in a journal. Every financial statement, saved in a secure folder. Every piece of evidence that might matter later, carefully preserved and organized. Maggie filed a motion to void the divorce agreement and freeze all marital assets pending litigation. She argued that Emma had signed under duress, that she had been denied legal representation, that the Christmas Eve ambush was a deliberate tactic to force a favorable settlement. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. For the first time since Christmas Eve, Emma allowed herself to feel hope. Not joy, not optimism, but the cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, things might work out. She should have known better. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope made you drop your guard just when you should be watching most carefully. And the Mitchell family was not finished with Emma Sullivan yet. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in a Manhattan courtroom and watched her husband's face turn pale. The hearing room was smaller than she had expected, all dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights. Judge Harriet Monroe, a stern woman in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, presided from her elevated bench. She had a reputation for being fair but uncompromising, the kind of judge who did not tolerate games or manipulation. Maggie had presented their case with surgical precision. She walked the judge through the events of Christmas Eve, the ambush, the presence of the mistress, the complete lack of legal representation for Emma. She presented evidence of the Mitchell family's financial troubles, the hidden debts, the desperate circumstances that had driven them to target a vulnerable pregnant woman. She argued that the divorce agreement had been obtained through coercion and should be voided entirely. Ryan's lawyer, a slick man in a $3,000 suit named Bradford Hamilton, tried to counter. He argued that Emma had signed the papers voluntarily, that no one had held a gun to her head, that she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. But Judge Monroe was not buying it. She looked at the evidence, looked at the circumstances, and made her ruling. The judge granted Maggie's motion for a temporary restraining order against any dispersal of marital assets. Ryan could not touch the bank accounts. He could not sell any property. He could not make any major financial decisions without court approval. Furthermore, the judge said she had serious concerns about the manner in which these divorce papers had been obtained. She ordered both parties to return in 30 days for a full hearing on whether the agreement should be voided. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous after weeks of helplessness. Patricia sat in the gallery, her face frozen in an expression of barely contained fury. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and pearls at her throat, the picture of respectable society matron. But her eyes burned with rage that her careful plans were being disrupted. Gregory slouched beside her, looking like he wanted to disappear into the wooden bench. He had not looked at Emma once during the entire hearing. Jessica was notably absent, probably too smart to show her face in a legal proceeding where her presence as the other woman would only hurt Ryan's case. After the hearing, Maggie and Emma went to a diner on West 42nd Street to decompress. Maggie ordered a large stack of what she called victory pancakes, even though it was 3 in the afternoon. Emma ordered tea and allowed herself to smile for the first time in weeks. Maggie said they had won the first round. She said Ryan was scared now. She said his lawyers were probably screaming at him for letting his mother orchestrate that Christmas ambush without proper legal preparation. Maggie said amateurs made mistakes, and the Mitchells were definitely amateurs. Emma asked what happened next. Maggie explained that they would build their case over the next 30 days. They would document Ryan's financial mismanagement, his affair, his abandonment of his pregnant wife. They would gather testimony from witnesses who could speak to his character. They would prepare a comprehensive argument for why the divorce agreement should be voided and why Emma deserved a fair settlement. By the time they got to the actual divorce proceedings, Maggie said Ryan Mitchell would be lucky to walk away with his underwear. For a moment, Emma let herself believe that the nightmare was almost over. The court had ruled in her favor. She had a brilliant lawyer on her side. She had evidence of wrongdoing. The Mitchells were on the defensive. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. A woman approached their table as they were finishing their pancakes. She was in her late 50s with short gray hair and kind eyes behind simple wireframe glasses. She wore a sensible wool coat and practical shoes, the opposite of Patricia's calculated elegance. The woman introduced herself as Caroline Price and said she was Ryan's aunt. Emma tensed immediately. She had never met Ryan's aunt, had barely known she existed. Ryan rarely talked about his extended family, and when he did, it was usually to mention how they had all cut ties with each other over various old grudges. Carolyn said she understood Emma's suspicion. She said she would be suspicious too, in Emma's position. But Caroline said she had something important to tell Emma, and she hoped Emma would hear her out. Maggie started to object, reaching for her phone to call security or record the conversation or both. But Emma raised her hand. Something in Caroline's eyes suggested this was not a trick. There was genuine warmth there and genuine concern. Emma told Caroline to sit down and talk. Caroline slid into the booth beside Emma. She folded her hands on the table and took a deep breath. She said she had seen the court filing from this morning's hearing. News traveled fast in her family, even when family members were not speaking to each other. She said she knew what her brother and sister-in-law were capable of because she had experienced it herself. 30 years ago, Caroline said, she had fallen in love with a construction worker named Bill Price. He was kind and hardworking and decent, everything that the Mitchell men were not. Caroline had wanted to marry him. Patricia and Gregory had objected violently. They had called Bill a gold digger, a fortune hunter, a man who was only interested in Caroline's family money. Never mind that the Mitchell fortune had already been largely depleted by that point. Never mind that Bill had never asked for a penny. The family closed ranks against him. When Caroline announced she was marrying Bill anyway, her parents had disowned her. Patricia had supported the decision enthusiastically. Caroline had not spoken to any of them in 3 decades. She had built a quiet life in Brooklyn, running a small bakery with her husband until he passed away 5 years ago. She had only learned about Ryan's marriage to Emma through newspaper announcements. She had only learned about the divorce through courthouse records that were technically public. Caroline paused and looked Emma directly in the eyes. She said Patricia had been planning something for months. Caroline said she did not know exactly what, but she recognized the look in Patricia's eyes. It was the same look Patricia had worn when she convinced their parents to cut Caroline out of the family. Calculating, predatory, certain of victory. Caroline handed Emma a business card with her phone number and the address of her bakery in Brooklyn. She said that when things got worse, and they would get worse, Emma should call her. She said she had no loyalty to the Mitchell family and every reason to want to see Patricia brought down. Emma thanked Caroline, not sure what to make of this unexpected ally. An enemy's enemy was not necessarily a friend. But there was something about Caroline that felt genuine, that felt safe. Caroline left and Maggie raised her eyebrows. She said that was certainly interesting. She said she would run a background check on Caroline, just to be safe. In divorce cases, you could never be too careful about who you trusted. They finished their pancakes and tea. Emma felt lighter than she had in weeks. She had won a court battle. She had a fierce lawyer on her side. She had an unexpected ally in Ryan's own family. The future looked brighter than it had on Christmas Eve. She arrived back at Maggie's apartment around 6 p.m. The sun had set and the street lights had come on, casting pools of golden light across the snowy sidewalk. A man was waiting outside the building door. He was holding a large envelope. Emma's stomach dropped before her brain even registered why. She knew what this was. She knew it in her bones. Process servers did not show up at random with good news. The man asked if she was Emma Sullivan Mitchell. His voice was flat and professional, completely devoid of emotion. This was just a job to him. He probably delivered devastating news to people every single day. Emma confirmed her identity. Her voice came out steady even though her hands were shaking. The man handed her the envelope and walked away without another word. Emma stood on the sidewalk, staring at the envelope in her hands. The paper was heavy and official-looking. Her name was printed neatly on the front. Whatever was inside, it was going to change everything. She heard Maggie's heels clicking on the sidewalk behind her. Maggie had stopped at a coffee shop and was carrying 2 cups, one for each of them. She was asking what was going on, why Emma was standing in the cold like a statue. Emma opened the envelope. The documents inside made her blood run cold. Ryan had filed for full custody of their unborn child. The petition claimed that Emma was mentally unstable. It cited her stay at the homeless shelter as evidence of erratic behavior and poor decision-making. It cited her medical emergency on Christmas night as proof that she could not handle the stress of parenthood. The petition claimed that Emma was financially irresponsible. It pointed to her lack of income, her lack of assets, her dependence on the charity of friends. It argued that she could not provide a stable home for a child. The petition included testimony from Patricia Mitchell about Emma's supposed instability throughout the marriage. Patricia claimed that Emma had mood swings, that she was paranoid, that she had made delusional accusations against Ryan without evidence. There were photographs attached, pictures of Emma standing in line at Hope House on Christmas Eve, her face drawn and desperate, pictures of Emma being loaded into an ambulance, clearly in distress, pictures that someone had taken without her knowledge, stalking her during the worst night of her life. And there was a request for immediate intervention, arguing that the unborn child was in danger and that Ryan should be granted full custody the moment the baby was born. Emma collapsed against the brick wall of Maggie's building, the papers scattered from her nerveless fingers, pages catching the wind and drifting across the snowy sidewalk. They were trying to take her baby. Everything she had fought for, everything she had survived, meant nothing if they could take her daughter away. The court victory from that morning suddenly felt hollow. She had won a battle over money, but they were waging war over her child. Maggie was picking up the scattered pages, her face cycling through shock, then fury, then steely determination. She said this was insane. She said no judge in their right mind would grant custody to a father who had abandoned his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. She said they would fight this. But Emma heard the uncertainty in Maggie's voice. She knew what Emma knew. Courts were unpredictable. Judges were human. And the Mitchell family, despite their financial troubles, clearly had resources and allies that Emma did not yet understand. Someone was helping them. Someone was funding this attack. Someone with deep pockets and deeper grudges. The nightmare was not almost over. The nightmare was just beginning. The next few weeks were the most difficult of Emma's life. Every day brought new legal filings, new accusations, new attacks on her character and her fitness as a mother. Ryan's lawyers were aggressive and well-funded, mounting an assault that seemed disproportionate to the Mitchell family's supposed financial troubles. Maggie worked around the clock to counter every claim. She gathered character witnesses from Emma's workplace, colleagues and supervisors who could testify to her competence and stability. She documented Emma's years of dedicated service at the hospital, helping families through their worst moments. She collected letters of recommendation from professors, from volunteer coordinators, from everyone who had ever seen Emma at her best. But Ryan's lawyers were good, better than they should have been, considering the family's situation. They presented Emma's brief stay at the homeless shelter as evidence of mental instability. They twisted her medical emergency into proof that she could not handle stress. They painted her as a woman on the edge of collapse, a danger to herself and others. They even found ways to use Emma's strengths against her. Her job helping troubled families became evidence that she was surrounded by dysfunction. Her modest lifestyle became proof of the poor financial judgment. Her kindness became naivety. Her trust became gullibility. Her love became obsession. Emma felt herself breaking under the pressure. One night around 2 a.m, she found herself crying on Maggie's couch, unable to stop. The pregnancy hormones made everything more intense, amplifying her emotions until they felt too big for her body. The fear for her daughter made everything more desperate, adding stakes to every decision and every setback. She felt like she was drowning. No matter how hard she fought, the water kept rising. Every time she thought she had found footing, another wave knocked her down. Maggie sat beside her and wrapped her arms around Emma. She held her while she cried, not trying to fix anything, just being present. When Emma's sobs finally subsided, Maggie spoke quietly. She said that Emma was the strongest person she knew. She said that strength did not mean doing everything alone. She said that strength was not about never needing help. Strength was about letting people help you when you needed it. Maggie said that isolation was what abusers counted on. They wanted their victims alone and vulnerable and too ashamed to reach out. The fact that Emma had called for help, had accepted help, had allowed herself to lean on others during the hardest time of her life, that was strength. Emma asked how she was supposed to fight people who had more money, more lawyers, more connections. She said she had nothing. They had everything. They were going to win. Maggie shook her head firmly. She said something was not adding up. The Mitchell family was broke. Their finances were a disaster. Ryan's firm was underwater. Their brownstone was mortgaged to nothing. Their credit cards were maxed out. But someone was funding this custody battle, and that someone was not them. These lawyers were expensive. The private investigators who had taken those photographs of Emma were expensive. This coordinated assault required resources that the Mitchells simply did not have. Maggie said they needed to figure out who was really behind this attack, and they needed to figure it out fast. Emma started digging into her own past, looking for anything that might explain why the Mitchells had targeted her specifically. She had always assumed their relationship was random, that Ryan had simply happened to sit next to her at that coffee shop 3 years ago. But what if it was not random? What if nothing about their relationship had ever been random? She found old emails from when she and Ryan were first dating, love notes and dinner plans and inside jokes. Reading them now felt like reading messages from a stranger. Had any of it been real? Had Ryan ever actually loved her, or had she been a target from the very beginning? She found photographs from their courtship, their wedding, their first year of marriage. Ryan smiling at her with what she had believed was genuine affection. Ryan holding her hand at her father's funeral. Ryan pressing his hand against her belly when she told him she was pregnant. What had he been thinking in those moments? What had been going through his mind while he pretended to love her? One photograph caught her attention. It was from a gala event, some charity function Ryan had dragged her to early in their relationship. In the background, partially obscured by other guests, she could see Patricia standing with someone else. A man in an expensive suit, his face turned slightly away from the camera. There was something familiar about that man, something Emma could not quite place. She studied the photograph for hours, trying to figure out who he was and why his presence nagged at her. She could not identify him. The image was too blurred, too obscured, but she saved it anyway, adding it to the growing file of evidence and questions. At work the next day, one of Emma's co-workers mentioned something that made her blood run cold. The co-worker said that some woman had been asking about Emma. The woman had come to the hospital claiming to be Ryan's aunt. She had asked questions about Emma's work schedule, her job performance, her relationships with colleagues. She had seemed very interested in Emma's medical history, particularly anything related to her pregnancy. Emma's heart started pounding. She asked what the woman looked like. The co-worker described a tall blonde in expensive clothes, very put together, very elegant, the kind of woman who looked like she had never worked a day in her life. Emma went cold. Carolyn Price was short with gray hair and dressed practically. This woman was someone else entirely. Patricia had been at Emma's workplace, gathering information, building her custody case. The enemy was even closer than Emma had realized. She called Caroline that evening and told her what had happened. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Then she said there was something Emma needed to know about her father. Emma's breath caught. She asked what Caroline meant. Caroline said that 4 years ago, Patricia had hired a private investigator. This was before Emma had even met Ryan. The investigator had been looking into potential targets, wealthy individuals who might be vulnerable to a certain kind of approach. One of the people the investigator had researched was Harold Blackwell. Emma felt the room tilt around her. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Caroline continued. The investigator had discovered that Harold Blackwell had a daughter named Emma, a daughter who had changed her surname to Sullivan, her mother's maiden name, after a falling out with her family years ago. A daughter who was living modestly in Manhattan, working as a hospital social worker, seemingly estranged from the family wealth. To the investigator and to Patricia, Emma had looked like the perfect target, a naive heiress who wanted to be loved for herself, not for her money. A woman who would be grateful for attention, who would not ask too many questions, who would sign whatever papers were put in front of her. Patricia had known Emma's true identity all along, from before the first meeting at that coffee shop, from before Ryan had ever said hello. The entire marriage had been a setup from the very beginning. Emma sat in Caroline's small bakery in Brooklyn, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. Outside, snow was falling again, coating the streets in white. Inside, the warmth from the ovens made the windows fog. She was trying to process what Caroline had just told her. 3 years. Her entire marriage had been nothing but a calculated scheme to access her father's fortune. Caroline sat across from her, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. Her expression was sympathetic but determined. She had spent years watching from a distance as her family destroyed lives. Now she finally had a chance to do something about it. Emma asked why Patricia had not just exposed her identity from the beginning. Why go through the elaborate charade of pretending not to know who she really was? Carolyn said that was exactly the point. If Patricia had approached Emma directly, Emma would have been suspicious. She had spent years avoiding fortune hunters after her college boyfriend had turned out to be more interested in her trust fund than in her. She knew the signs. She would have seen Patricia coming from a mile away. But if Ryan swept her off her feet as a struggling architect who loved her for herself, Emma would have no reason to suspect anything. She would let her guard down. She would trust him completely. She would sign whatever papers he put in front of her without reading the fine print. Emma felt sick. She thought about all the moments she had believed were genuine, the romantic dinners, the surprise flowers, the way Ryan had seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. All of it had been calculated. All of it had been scripted. Ryan had probably researched her preferences, her habits, her vulnerabilities, and tailored his approach accordingly. Every sweet word had been a manipulation. Every gesture of affection had been a step in the plan. Carolyn continued, the scheme had worked beautifully at first. Emma had married Ryan and become legally tied to the Mitchell family. Patricia had probably assumed that Emma would eventually reveal her wealth, or that Harold Blackwell would die and leave everything to his daughter. But Harold had died 8 months ago, and Emma still had not claimed her inheritance. The estate was tied up in legal proceedings. Emma had been too consumed with grief to deal with the paperwork, too invested in maintaining her modest identity to reach out to her father's lawyers. Patricia was getting desperate. Whatever source had been funding her was probably running low on patience. She needed to force Emma's hand somehow. Emma suddenly understood the Christmas ambush. If Emma had no husband, no home, no resources, she would have no choice but to return to her wealthy family. She would have to claim her inheritance just to survive. And if Ryan had custody of the baby, he would have permanent leverage over her fortune. It was monstrous in its calculation. It was elegant in its cruelty. And it had almost worked. Emma asked Caroline how she knew all this. Caroline admitted that she had done some digging of her own. She still had contacts in Manhattan society, people who remembered her from before she was disowned. One of them had mentioned seeing Patricia meeting with a young blonde woman multiple times over the past year. Always at expensive restaurants, always with what looked like business documents. Emma's stomach dropped. She asked if the young blonde woman was Jessica Blake. Carolyn nodded. She said that Jessica was not just Ryan's mistress. She was Patricia's niece on her mother's side. The Blake family had distanced themselves from Patricia years ago after some scandal that Caroline did not know the details of, but Jessica had apparently reached out on her own. The two of them had been working together all along. Everything clicked into place. Jessica had been planted at Ryan's company specifically to seduce him, to create another angle of attack if Emma proved difficult to manipulate. The pregnancy was probably planned too, giving the Mitchells a backup heir to the Blackwell fortune. Emma asked if Ryan knew about all of this. Caroline said she did not know for certain, but she suspected that Ryan had been in on it from the beginning. A man did not accidentally marry a billionaire's daughter. He did not accidentally fall for his mother's niece. There were too many coincidences. Emma thought about her husband, the man who had held her at her father's funeral, who had cried with her over the loss, who had promised he would always be there for her. Had that been an act too? Had he been calculating how much closer Harold's death brought him to the money, even as he handed Emma tissues and murmured words of comfort? The betrayal was worse than any physical pain she had ever experienced. It was not just that Ryan had cheated on her. It was not just that he had thrown her out. It was that he had never loved her at all. Everything she thought they had built together was a lie from the foundation up. But beneath the pain, something else was growing, something harder, something colder. Emma had spent her whole life being soft, being accommodating, being the kind of woman that predators targeted because she seemed easy to manipulate. She had let herself be shaped by other people's expectations, molded by their desires, diminished by their needs. That woman was dying. Someone new was taking her place. Emma asked Caroline if she would be willing to testify in court about what she knew. Carolyn said she would do whatever it took to help Emma destroy Patricia. She said she had spent 30 years building a quiet life, staying away from her toxic family, healing from the wounds they had inflicted. But some debts needed to be paid, and Patricia had accumulated a very large debt. Emma thanked her sincerely. This was the first real ally she had found in this fight, someone with insider knowledge and a personal stake in the outcome. She had weapons now. Knowledge was power, and knowledge of the enemy's plans was the most powerful weapon of all. But she needed more. She needed evidence that would hold up in court. She needed proof that would be undeniable. Emma left Caroline's bakery with a new sense of purpose. The victim was becoming a warrior, and warriors did not wait for their enemies to attack. Warriors struck first. The next phase of Emma's counterattack began with hope and ended with devastation. Maggie had worked tirelessly to build their case. She had found evidence of the conspiracy, bank records showing payments from Patricia to Jessica over the past year, phone records showing hundreds of calls between the three conspirators, testimony from former employees of Ryan's firm who had witnessed his manipulation and dishonesty. She had filed motion after motion, building toward a hearing where they would expose everything. The custody case would be dismissed. The divorce would be voided. The Mitchells would be destroyed. Emma allowed herself to hope. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in late January. Emma arrived at the courthouse feeling confident for the first time in months. She wore a navy blue dress that Maggie had helped her pick out, professional and elegant. Her baby bump was visible now, a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. But something was wrong. Reporters were waiting outside the courthouse. A crowd of them with cameras and microphones and shouted questions. They swarmed Emma the moment she stepped out of the taxi, pressing in on all sides. One question cut through the chaos. A reporter asked if Emma was really Harold Blackwell's secret daughter. Another asked if she had hidden $1 billion inheritance from her husband. A third asked how she felt about deceiving everyone who had trusted her. Emma's blood turned to ice. She pushed through the crowd without answering, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Inside the courthouse, Maggie was waiting with a grim expression. Someone had leaked Emma's true identity to the press. It was all over the news. Headlines screamed about the secret billionaire heiress who had hidden her fortune from her poor, hardworking husband. Social media was exploding with speculation and condemnation. Overnight, the narrative had flipped completely. In the courtroom, Ryan's lawyer pounced on the revelation. He argued that Emma had concealed billions of dollars in assets throughout the marriage. He argued that if she was willing to lie about her identity, she was willing to lie about anything. He argued that she was clearly unstable and deceptive, unfit to raise a child. Patricia gave interviews outside the courthouse, her face arranged in an expression of wounded innocence. She told her reporters that her family had just wanted to welcome Emma. They had no idea she was deceiving them all along. They felt betrayed and heartbroken. The performance was Academy Award worthy. Inside the courtroom, Judge Monroe was visibly troubled by the new information. Everything Maggie presented was now filtered through the lens of Emma's deception. The evidence of conspiracy looked like desperate accusations. The testimony about Ryan's behavior looked like revenge. The judge said she needed time to consider this new information. She said she was granting Ryan's request for temporary custody rights, pending a full investigation. Emma would have supervised visitation only once the baby was born. The gavel came down like a death sentence. Emma barely made it out of the courthouse before she collapsed. Maggie caught her and helped her to a bench while reporters continued shouting questions and cameras continued flashing. She had lost everything: her reputation, her credibility, her case. And in 2 months, when her daughter was born, she would lose her baby too. This was her lowest point, lower even than Christmas Eve, lower than the hospital, lower than the homeless shelter. She had climbed so far only to fall even farther. How had the press found out her true identity? Only a handful of people knew. Emma, Maggie, Caroline, and George Hammond, her father's estate lawyer. Emma had called George a few weeks ago to check on the inheritance proceedings. She had mentioned that she might need to access funds soon, that her circumstances had changed. George had seemed surprised but supportive. He had promised to expedite things. George Hammond had joined her father's law firm as a last-minute replacement when the original estate attorney retired. He had started just 6 months before Harold's death, 6 months after Patricia's private investigator had discovered Emma's identity. The realization crashed over Emma like a tidal wave. George Hammond was Patricia's plant inside the Blackwell estate. He had been there all along, watching, waiting, feeding information back to the Mitchells. And now he had betrayed Emma to the press to destroy her case. There was no one left to trust. Every safety net was an illusion. Every ally was a potential traitor. 2 months from now, Emma would give birth to a daughter she might never get to raise. The snow began falling again, soft and cold, covering the city in white silence. Emma sat on that bench outside the courthouse and felt the last of her hope die. But something else was stirring in its place, not hope, not despair, something harder, something sharper. Rage, pure, clean, crystalline rage. They had taken everything from her, her husband, her home, her reputation, and now they were trying to take her child. Emma was done being a victim. She was done playing by their rules. She was done waiting for justice to be handed to her. If she wanted justice, she would have to take it herself. The next 6 weeks brought disaster after disaster, each one more devastating than the last. The first catastrophe came 3 days after the court hearing. Emma woke to find that her bank account had been frozen. A fraud alert had been filed, claiming suspicious activity. The bank's automated system had locked everything down, and human customer service could not tell her when it would be resolved. Emma knew immediately who was responsible. George Hammond, as executor of her father's estate, had access to financial systems and institutional connections. He could file complaints, raise red flags, create bureaucratic obstacles that would take months to untangle. Without access to money, Emma could not pay for anything. Not food, not transportation, not the medical care she needed for her increasingly difficult pregnancy. She was dependent on Maggie's generosity for everything, a position that made her feel helpless and ashamed. The second catastrophe came 2 weeks later. Emma received a call from her supervisor at the hospital. There was going to be a restructuring, and Emma's position was being eliminated. The supervisor was very sorry. She wished Emma well in her future endeavors. There was nothing personal about it. But Emma saw Patricia's name on the hospital's donor list, a substantial donation made just days before the restructuring announcement. Patricia had connections on the board. Patricia had always resented Emma's presence at her precious charity events. They had bought her termination. Emma was now broke and unemployed, with a baby due in 8 weeks and a custody battle she was losing. The walls were closing in from every direction. The third catastrophe was the worst. It happened on a Thursday evening, 7 weeks before her due date. Emma was alone in Maggie's apartment, trying to eat dinner despite having no appetite. Maggie was working late, preparing for yet another court filing. The first contraction hit without warning, a sharp, twisting pain that doubled Emma over and made her gasp. She pressed her hands against her belly and felt her daughter moving, agitated and restless. Too early. It was too early. She still had 7 weeks. The baby was not ready. She was not ready. The second contraction was worse. Emma stumbled towards the phone, managed to dial 911, managed to give Maggie's address before another wave of pain knocked her to the floor. The ambulance ride was a nightmare of sirens and bright lights and paramedics asking questions she could barely process. Her blood pressure was spiking. The baby was in distress. They were taking her straight to surgery. Emma was alone. Maggie was in court. Carolyn was at her bakery. There was no one to hold her hand, no one to tell her it would be okay, no one to be with her during the most terrifying moment of her life. The operating room was cold and impossibly bright. Doctors and nurses moved around her in a choreographed dance she did not understand. Someone was explaining what was happening, but the words did not make sense through the fog of fear and pain. Emergency cesarean section. 33 weeks. The baby was coming, whether they were ready or not. Emma stared at the ceiling and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. Please let her be okay. Please let my daughter live. I have already lost everything else. Please do not take her too. The surgery was a blur, pressure and pulling and voices calling out numbers and readings. And then, finally, a sound that cut through everything else. A baby's cry. Thin and reedy, and the most beautiful thing Emma had ever heard. Her daughter was born at 2:37 in the morning, weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces. She was tiny and fragile, her skin almost translucent, her fingers smaller than Emma's pinky nail. They took her to the neonatal intensive care unit immediately. She needed help breathing. She needed monitoring. She needed machines to do what her body was not yet ready to do on its own. Emma lay in recovery, alone and exhausted, watching the clock on the wall and waiting for someone to tell her if her daughter would survive. Maggie arrived around 6 in the morning, frantic and disheveled. She had gotten Emma's messages when she finally left the courthouse. She had driven to the hospital, breaking every speed limit in existence. She apologized over and over for not being there. Emma barely heard her. All her attention was focused on the NICU, on the glass windows that separated her from her daughter, on the tiny form in the incubator surrounded by tubes and wires. The doctor said the baby was a fighter. She was small but strong. Her lungs were developing faster than expected. She was responding well to treatment. The doctor said they were cautiously optimistic. Caroline arrived an hour later, bringing food that Emma could not eat and words of comfort that Emma could barely absorb. She sat with Emma at the NICU window, watching the baby sleep. Emma had named her Hope. It was the only name that made sense. Hope for the future. Hope for survival. Hope that something good could still come from all this destruction. Standing there, watching her daughter fight for every breath, something shifted inside Emma. She had spent weeks feeling sorry for herself. Weeks feeling helpless and afraid and broken. But Hope was not broken. Hope was fighting with everything she had. This tiny person, barely 4 pounds, was refusing to give up. If Hope could fight, so could Emma. She turned away from the window and looked at Maggie and Carolyn. Her voice, when she spoke, was stronger than it had been in weeks. She said she was done being a victim. She said she was done letting the Mitchells control her life. She said it was time to fight back. Maggie asked what Emma had in mind. Emma said she needed to find evidence that could not be disputed. Evidence that would expose the entire conspiracy. Evidence that no judge could ignore and no spin doctor could explain away. She asked if George Hammond was the only executor of her father's estate. Maggie said she would check. She pulled out her phone and started making calls, her fingers flying across the screen. 20 minutes later, she had an answer that changed everything. Harold Blackwell had named 2 executors, not 1. George Hammond was the first, appointed after the original attorney retired. But the second executor was Martha Wellington, Harold's personal lawyer for over 40 years. Martha had retired 5 years ago and moved to Vermont, but her position as co-executor had never been revoked. Harold Blackwell had prepared for this. He had anticipated that someone might try to manipulate his estate after he died, and he had left a fail-safe that George Hammond did not know about. Emma picked up her phone and dialed the number Maggie had found. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was elderly but sharp, with no trace of confusion or frailty. Emma introduced herself as Harold Blackwell's daughter. She said she desperately needed Martha's help. She said something had gone terribly wrong with her father's estate. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. Martha said she had been expecting this call. Harold had warned her that someone might try to manipulate things after he died. He had left something for Emma outside the official estate documents, something that George Hammond had no idea existed. Emma felt her heart stop and restart. She asked what her father had left. Martha said it was a letter and a key. The letter would explain everything. Martha said she would overnight it immediately. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt something other than despair. She felt power. The package from Martha Wellington arrived the next morning by express courier. Emma opened it in Maggie's living room, her hands trembling with anticipation. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents. On top was a handwritten letter on her father's personal stationery. The creamy stock embossed with the Blackwell family crest that Emma remembered from childhood. She unfolded the letter and began to read. My darling Emma. Emma, Harold had written in his elegant cursive. If you are reading this letter, then something has gone wrong. I have always feared that predators would try to exploit you after my death. That is why I created this fail-safe, outside the knowledge of anyone at my law firm. Emma's eyes blurred with tears. Even from beyond the grave, her father was trying to protect her. The letter continued. Inside my safety deposit box at First National Bank, you will find everything you need. Original copies of my will, exactly as I wrote them, untampered. Financial records that will expose any theft or manipulation of the estate. And recordings that I made of certain conversations. Conversations that certain people would very much prefer to remain private. Emma held her breath. Recordings. Her father had recordings. The key is where it has always been, Harold wrote. With the only person I trusted completely. Emma stared at that line. The only person Harold had trusted completely. Who was that? Then she remembered. When Emma was 5 years old, her mother had died after a long illness. Emma had been inconsolable, crying for days, unable to understand why her mother would not wake up. Harold had given her a blanket to hold at the funeral. Her mother's baby blanket, soft and faded, smelling faintly of the lavender perfume her mother had always worn. Emma had carried that blanket everywhere for years. Through elementary school and middle school and high school, through college and her first apartment and her marriage to Ryan. It was her talisman, her connection to the mother she had lost, her comfort in times of stress. She had grabbed it instinctively on Christmas Eve when Patricia threw her out. It was in her suitcase right now, tucked between sweaters and maternity clothes, the one thing she had kept from her old life. Emma rushed to the guest room and pulled the blanket from her suitcase. The fabric was thin now, worn smooth by decades of handling. She felt along the edges, the seams, the corners. There, in the hem, a small hard object, sewn carefully into the lining. Emma grabbed scissors from Maggie's desk and carefully cut the stitches. A small brass key tumbled into her palm. First National Bank. Her father had hidden the key to his failsafe in the one thing he knew Emma would never let go of. She wanted to go to the bank immediately, but the doctors would not release Hope from the NICU for another week. Emma spent every moment she could at her daughter's bedside, watching the monitors, tracking each small improvement, willing Hope to grow stronger. And Hope did grow stronger. Every day she breathed a little easier. Every day she needed the machines a little less. Every day she proved that Blackwell women were fighters. On the 7th day, the doctor said Hope was stable enough to go home. She was still small, still fragile, but no longer in immediate danger. Emma held her daughter properly for the first time, skin to skin, feeling Hope's tiny heartbeat against her chest. She whispered promises against Hope's downy head. She promised to protect her. She promised to fight for her. She promised that no one would ever take her away. The next morning, Emma went to First National Bank with Maggie and Carolyn flanking her. Hope was safely at Maggie's apartment with a nurse Caroline had hired through her bakery connections, someone trustworthy who asked no questions. The safety deposit box was larger than Emma expected. She opened it with trembling hands, not sure what she would find inside. The contents exceeded her wildest hopes. Original estate documents. The pages clearly different from the versions George Hammond had shown her. Her father's true will, with handwritten notes in the margins and signatures properly witnessed. Financial records spanning 3 years, showing transfers between Patricia Mitchell, George Hammond, and various shell companies. A paper trail of conspiracy laid out in black and white, phone records and emails proving coordination between the conspirators, time-stamped evidence that would be impossible to refute, and a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. Emma pressed play with held breath. Her father's voice filled the small room, and Emma had to grab the table edge to steady herself. Harold said he was recording this conversation for future reference. He said he had reason to believe that George Hammond was not acting in good faith. He said he wanted documentation in case anything happened to him. Then another voice joined the recording, Patricia Mitchell's voice, dripping with the same honeyed poison Emma remembered from Christmas Eve. Patricia was discussing the plan to marry Ryan to Emma. She was explaining how they would wait until Harold died, then manipulate the estate through George. She was calculating Emma's net worth and discussing how to ensure Ryan got the maximum possible share. She was laughing about how naive Emma was, how trusting, how easy to manipulate. George Hammond's voice joined the conversation, confirming that he could alter estate documents, delay inheritance proceedings, create obstacles that would force Emma into exactly the position they wanted her in. The recording was dated 18 months ago, before Harold's death, before the Christmas ambush, before any of this nightmare began. Harold Blackwell had known about the conspiracy. He had gathered evidence, and he had hidden it where only Emma could find it, trusting that his daughter would eventually need it. There was one more item in the box, a DNA test ordered by Harold 6 months before his death. The test results showed the genetic profile of an unborn child compared against samples from multiple potential fathers. Jessica Blake's baby, the child she claimed was Ryan's, was not biologically related to Ryan Mitchell. The father, according to the test, was Gregory Mitchell, Ryan's own father. Emma sat back in the vault, overwhelmed by the implications. Jessica had been sleeping with both Ryan and Gregory. The baby that Patricia was so eager to claim as a Mitchell heir was actually the product of an affair between Patricia's husband and Patricia's own niece. The Mitchell family was even more dysfunctional than Emma had imagined, and now she had proof of all of it. She looked at Maggie and Caroline. She asked if this was enough. Maggie's smile was predatory. She said it was more than enough. This was enough to destroy them all. But Emma shook her head. She did not want lawyers and judges handling her revenge. She wanted to see their faces when they realized they had lost. She wanted to watch their world crumble. She called the Mitchell family that evening. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She had heard about Emma's difficult delivery. She hoped the baby was doing well. She said it was such a shame that Emma would not get to raise her. Emma kept her voice steady and calm. She said there was going to be a reading of her father's will the following day. She said she thought the Mitchell family should be present. Patricia laughed. She asked why she would attend the will reading of a man she had never met. Emma said because it concerned all of them. Emma said Patricia should trust her. There was a long pause. Emma could practically hear Patricia calculating, trying to figure out what this meant, whether it was a trap or an opportunity. Finally, Patricia said she would be there. Emma hung up and smiled. It was not a nice smile. Tomorrow, everything would change. The conference room at Martha Wellington's law office was paneled in dark mahogany and lit by brass fixtures that cast warm pools of light across the long table. 20 leather chairs surrounded the table, more than enough for everyone Emma had invited. Emma arrived first, carrying hope in a soft carrier against her chest. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Maggie stood at Emma's right side, dressed in her sharpest courtroom suit, vibrating with barely contained anticipation. Carolyn stood at Emma's left, calm and steady, ready to face the family that had disowned her 30 years ago. Martha Wellington presided from the head of the table. At 78, she was white-haired and slightly stooped, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She had practiced law for 50 years and had seen every kind of human depravity. Nothing shocked her anymore. The Mitchells arrived together, a united front of expensive clothes and barely concealed contempt. Ryan entered first, looking thinner than Emma remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. He wore a suit that had clearly cost thousands of dollars, probably bought with money he did not have. His eyes found Emma immediately, then dropped to the baby carrier. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Regret, longing, or just more calculation. Patricia followed, dressed in a pearl gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, her smile fixed in an expression of polite interest that did not reach her eyes. Gregory shuffled behind his wife, unable to meet anyone's gaze. He looked older than his years, beaten down by decades of living with Patricia, by the failure of his career, by whatever guilty secrets he was carrying. Jessica came last, her pregnant belly prominent in a designer maternity dress. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room, clearly wondering why she had been included in this gathering. And with them came George Hammond, looking confident and relaxed in his three-piece suit. He clearly expected this to be another opportunity to undermine Emma's case. He had no idea what was coming. Emma had also invited guests. 3 of Patricia's closest society friends, the women she had lunched with and gossiped with and competed with for decades. Emma had told them this was a social event, a chance to witness something historic. They sat along the wall in their designer dresses, looking curious and slightly confused. When everyone was seated, Emma stood. She thanked them all for coming. She said she knew some of them were wondering why she had called this meeting. She said the answer was simple. She wanted to tell them a story. Emma spoke calmly and clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. She told the story from the beginning, how Patricia had hired a private investigator 4 years ago, how the investigator had discovered Emma's true identity as Harold Blackwell's daughter, how Patricia had orchestrated Ryan's accidental meeting with Emma at that coffee shop, carefully staging their first encounter to seem like fate. She told them how Ryan had pursued her with calculated intensity, how their entire relationship had been designed to gain access to the Blackwell fortune, how their marriage had been nothing but a long con, a scheme that had required years of patient deception. Patricia interrupted, her voice sharp with outrage. She said this was ridiculous. She said Emma was clearly delusional, desperate, making up lies to salvage her failed marriage. Patricia said this meeting was over. Emma smiled. She said she was just getting started. She pulled out the first document. Bank records showing transfers from Patricia to George Hammond, totaling over $200,000 over 3 years. Payment for his services as a spy inside the Blackwell estate. George Hammond stood abruptly, his confident facade cracking. He said those documents were obtained illegally. He said they could not be used in any court proceeding. He said Emma was going to be facing charges of her own. Martha Wellington spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. She said the documents had been stored in a safety deposit box owned by Harold Blackwell. She said Harold had obtained them through legal means and preserved them for exactly this purpose. She said Mr. Hammond should sit down. George sat. Emma pulled out the second document, phone records showing hundreds of calls between Patricia, George, and Jessica. A web of communication spanning years, coordinating their attack on Emma and her inheritance. She pulled out the third document, the original estate papers, side by side with the versions George had been using. The alterations were obvious, amateur forgery that any expert would immediately recognize. Patricia's society friends were whispering among themselves now, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. They had known Patricia for years, had attended her parties, had trusted her judgment in social matters. They were watching that trust crumble in real time. Emma pressed play on the audio recording. Her father's voice filled the room. Harold Blackwell, speaking from beyond the grave, documenting the conspiracy that had destroyed his daughter's life. And then Patricia's voice, laughing about how naive Emma was, calculating her net worth, planning how to strip her of everything she owned. And George Hammond's voice, confirming every detail of the scheme. Patricia's face had gone gray. Gregory was staring at the table, refusing to look at anyone. Ryan sat frozen, his expression unreadable. Jessica looked like she wanted to run, but could not make herself move. Emma stopped the recording. She looked directly at Patricia. She said that was Patricia admitting to fraud, conspiracy, and theft. She said copies had already been sent to the district attorney's office, to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and to the State Bar Association. She said indictments would be coming soon. Patricia's society friends stood up and moved toward the door, unable to distance themselves fast enough from the unfolding disaster. One of them, a woman Patricia had known for 20 years, paused to look back with undisguised contempt before leaving. Emma was not finished. She pulled out the DNA test. She said she had one more piece of evidence to present. She said it concerned Jessica's baby. Jessica stood up quickly, reaching for her purse. She said she did not have to listen to this. She said she was leaving. Emma said Jessica might want to hear this first. She said the DNA test proved that Jessica's baby was not Ryan's child. Ryan turned to look at Jessica. His face showed confusion first, then dawning horror, then rage. He demanded to know what Emma was talking about. He demanded to know whose baby Jessica was carrying. Emma said the test proved that Jessica's baby belonged to Gregory Mitchell, Ryan's father. The room exploded. Patricia screamed. Not a dignified exclamation of surprise, but an actual scream, raw and primal and full of anguish. She turned on her husband with fury blazing in her eyes. She demanded to know if it was true. She demanded to know how long it had been going on. She demanded to know how he could do this to her. Gregory tried to stand, to leave, to escape the maelstrom he had created, but his legs would not support him. He collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands, making sounds that might have been sobs. Jessica was crying openly now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. She backed toward the door, mumbling excuses that no one was listening to. She had gambled everything on the Mitchell scheme, and she had lost spectacularly. Ryan stood in the middle of the chaos, staring at his father with an expression of absolute betrayal. His mother had used him. His mistress had betrayed him. His father had cuckolded him. Everything he thought he knew was a lie. For one moment, Emma almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered Christmas Eve, the divorce papers, the cruel words, the mistress displayed like a trophy, the complete indifference to the daughter growing in Emma's belly. Whatever Ryan was feeling now, he had earned it. Emma raised her voice over the chaos. She said she had one more thing to say. The room gradually quieted. Even Patricia stopped screaming, though tears of rage were still streaming down her face. Emma said she had spent her whole life trying to be loved by people who would never love her back. She had hidden who she was because she was afraid of being used. She had tolerated disrespect because she thought she did not deserve better. She looked at Ryan. She said he had taught her something valuable. He had shown her exactly who she did not want to become. He had shown her that some people would always see others as opportunities, as resources, as means to an end. She looked at Patricia. She said Patricia had taught her something too. Patricia had shown her that cruelty often wore expensive clothes and spoke in polite sentences. Patricia had shown her that the most dangerous predators were the ones who smiled while they destroyed you. Emma looked down at Hope, still sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware of the drama swirling around her. She said her daughter would grow up knowing her worth. Her daughter would grow up knowing that love, without respect, was just another word for suffering. Her daughter would grow up strong. Emma turned and walked toward the door. Maggie and Caroline followed her. At the threshold, she paused. She looked back one final time at the family that had tried to destroy her. She said she would see them in court. Then she left, and she did not look back again. The apartment was modest by Manhattan standards. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with windows that overlooked a quiet street in Brooklyn. Emma had chosen it carefully, despite having access to her full inheritance now. She did not want a penthouse. She did not want a man and a mansion. She wanted a home, a place where Hope could grow up feeling safe and loved, a place where memories would be made, not purchased. Hope was walking now, taking unsteady steps across the living room carpet, her face scrunched in concentration. Every time she fell, she got back up. Every time she stumbled, she tried again. She was 14 months old and utterly fearless, a tiny warrior who did not know the meaning of give up. Emma watched from the couch, a cup of tea warming her hands. Sunday afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden squares across the floor. Outside, she could hear children playing and birds singing and the gentle hum of a neighborhood at peace. Maggie arrived at 3 o'clock sharp, as she did every Sunday. She brought wine and pastries from Carolina's bakery and stories about the ridiculous things she had encountered at work that week. She had been promoted to partner last month, the youngest in her firm's history. The Mitchell case had made her reputation. Caroline came by later, bringing homemade cookies still warm from the oven. Her bakery was thriving now, featured in food magazines and beloved by the neighborhood. She had finally found the success that her family had always told her she would never achieve. Emma's life had changed dramatically in the past year. The Blackwell Foundation, which she had established with her inheritance, was now operational. It provided housing, job training, legal assistance, and childcare for women escaping difficult situations. Every woman who walked through those doors reminded Emma that survival was not just about having resources. It was about having the courage to use them. She thought sometimes about the women she had met at Hope House on Christmas Eve. Rosa Martinez had reached out a few months ago, using the contact information Emma had left with the shelter. Rosa had a new apartment now, a new job, a new life. She was rebuilding from the wreckage of her marriage, one day at a time. The Mitchell family had fallen spectacularly after that day in Martha's office. Patricia was currently serving 18 months in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Her society friends had abandoned her completely. The women who had once competed for invitations to her parties now pretended they had never known her name. George Hammond had been disbarred and faced criminal charges of his own. His law license was gone, his reputation destroyed, his future reduced to whatever plea deal his lawyers could negotiate. Ryan had taken a plea deal to avoid prison time. He had lost his architecture license and now worked at a car dealership in New Jersey, selling used vehicles on commission. Emma had heard he was living in a small apartment, barely making ends meet. Gregory and Patricia had divorced. The revelations about Gregory's affair with Jessica had been the final straw, destroying whatever remained of their marriage. Gregory lived alone now, estranged from both his sons, seeing no one and going nowhere. Jessica had disappeared after the conference room confrontation. Emma did not know where she had gone and did not care to find out. Jessica had given birth to a daughter a few months later, the child who was technically Hope's half-sister. But that child had a different father, a different family, a different story. Sometimes Emma wondered if she should feel more satisfaction about their downfall, but mostly she just felt relief. The weight she had carried it for so long, the fear and the shame and the desperate need to be loved had finally lifted. She was enough, just as she was, just as she had always been. Hope toddled over and grabbed Emma's hand, babbling in the nonsense language of toddlers. Her dark hair curled around her ears, and her green eyes sparkled with mischief. She looked so much like Emma's mother that it sometimes took Emma's breath away. She lifted her daughter and held her close, breathing in the sweet smell of baby shampoo and innocence. There was a knock at the door. Maggie entered with her bottle of wine and an exaggerated complaint about the subway system. Maggie asked if any billionaires had been sliding into Emma's direct messages lately. Emma laughed. She said several, actually. She said she had told them she was busy. She and Hope had a very important appointment. Maggie asked what kind of appointment. Emma said with each other, they were watching cartoons. Maggie rolled her eyes fondly and poured 2 glasses of wine. Later that evening, Emma took Hope to the park near their apartment. The spring air was warm and fragrant with cherry blossoms. Other families were out enjoying the weather, children running and laughing and living their uncomplicated lives. Hope pointed at everything, the bees, the birds, the other children on the playground. She was fascinated by the whole world, eager to explore every corner of it. A man approached them near the swings. He was attractive, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He was pushing a stroller with a sleeping toddler inside. He said that Hope was adorable. He asked how old she was. Emma said Hope would be 15 months next week. The man introduced himself as James. He said he had just moved to the neighborhood. He said his daughter was about the same age. He said it was nice to meet another parent in the area. Emma smiled politely. She gave him her first name, nothing more. She was not ready for more. Maybe someday she would be, but for now she had everything she needed. She said it was nice to meet James. She said she hoped he liked the neighborhood. Then she lifted Hope and walked toward the sunset, leaving James watching from the playground. Some people might have thought her story was about revenge. It was not. It was about learning that she was enough, on her own terms, in her own time. It was about understanding that the right people would wait until she was ready. And if they would not wait, they were never right to begin with. It was about building a life that did not depend on anyone else's approval or permission or love. Emma had learned all of that the hard way. Through heartbreak and betrayal and the kind of pain that felt like it would never end. Through sleepless nights and courtroom battles and moments of despair so deep she thought she would drown. But she had survived, more than survived. She had emerged from the fire stronger than she had ever been before. Hope babbled something that sounded almost like mama. Emma kissed her daughter's forehead. She whispered that they had this, both of them. They always would. The sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber and rose. Somewhere in the vast city, the people who had hurt Emma were living with the consequences of their choices. But Emma was not thinking about them. She was thinking about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching ahead like an open road. She was thinking about the women the foundation would help and the lives that would be changed. She was thinking about Hope's birthday party and Maggie's terrible singing and Caroline's chocolate chip cookies. She was thinking about the future. And for the first time in years, the future looked bright. The greatest revenge is living well. But the greatest victory is not needing revenge at all. Emma Blackwell had finally learned the difference. And that is Emma's story. A woman who walked into the snow on Christmas Eve with nothing but a suitcase and a baby in her belly. A woman who was told she was worthless, disposable, forgettable. A woman who proved every single one of them wrong. But here is the real message of this story. Emma's victory was not about revenge. It was not about making them suffer, even though they certainly did. Her victory was about finally understanding that her worth was never determined by who recognized it. Her worth was always there. She just had to stop letting other people convince her it was not. You are enough. You have always been enough. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise has already disqualified themselves from your life. The greatest revenge is living well. But the greatest victory is not needing revenge at all. It is building a life so full of peace and purpose that the people who hurt you become nothing more than distant memories. If this story touched your heart, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. Stories about strength, stories about survival, stories about women who refuse to break. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Emma's position? Have you ever had to walk away from someone who did not deserve you? Your story matters too, and I read every single comment. If you know someone who needs to hear this message today, someone who is struggling, someone who feels trapped, someone who has forgotten their own worth, please share this video with them. You might be the reason they find the courage to walk away. And if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We post stories like this every week. Stories about love and betrayal, stories about justice and redemption, stories that remind you that no matter how dark things get, there is always a way forward. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, you deserve relationships that honor your full humanity, not just the parts that serve someone else's agenda. Until next time, take care of yourself and never let anyone make you feel like you are not enough, because you are. You always have been.